Architecture is important, if not essential, because it is bound to gravity and capable of embodying this union. A pixel or a vertex cannot do this. Apart from something as natural as mountains, architecture is the best medium to externalize gravity. Look at your churches and palaces. I mean then the Italian churches and palaces, of course. What an absorbing display of power, what a glorification of the gravity, what a voluptuous ode to the center of the earth. I personally believe that this union between architecture and gravity is the secret of the essential space. Everything virtual is impotent, inflationary, immune. Everything real is virile, vital, virulent. A pixel and a vertex are not sexy, not sensual. That entire so-called dominance of the virtual in the field of sex, politics and economy is one boring, dead mess. I rather walk on the street or in a building than in cyberspace. You could say that architecture is only becoming more important nowadays, but then we have to deploy architecture very precisely as a medium, as a means, and not search for the light, the transparent, the lean, the dry and the democratic, but for the heavy, the turbid, the Rubenesque fool, the lusty and the sovereign. When I was a student, I was not so happy about what was happening in architecture at that moment, because it was very boring. It was only about social housing and about functionalism. It was not so inspiring, so what we did in that time was to read a lot. We translated the books of Jean Baudrillard, for instance, and I have here a copy of it, The Fatal Strategies. We translated it into Dutch. And that was a starting point for a total different approach concerning architecture. And when I ended my study, we started an office which was called Knox, and we did not make architecture in the beginning, but we only made books and did expositions and funny stuffs, make videos, and that was actually the starting not of an architectural office, but more a research office. And we tried to find a way out of the traditional architecture. And our first project was the Sweetwater Pavilion in New Zealand. And that was actually the first building which we realized after a lot of research and a lot of reading, a lot of making stuff other than architecture. I always play with the opposites of light, heavy, virtual, real, and also stuff like fluid and orthogonal. And that is what I talked about in INFECT the soft, because it's not good to choose for one system. It's not good to choose for only fluid systems or fluid architecture or orthogonal architecture or orthogonal systems. You have to always to play with the opposites and to play in the space. I mean, you can see space as in between the opposites. That and as an architect, you have to control this space, this in-between space. And when I talked about INFECT the soft, I was thinking about not only to choose for fluid systems, but to have control of the space in between the opposites of fluid an orthogonal space. When you work on an architectural project, I think it is always necessary to bring in the project something outside of architecture. And that's why I use the word code very often, because the code is like a secret soul of the project, and the code can be very different than something, an architectural language like walls or roof or window. A code can bring life to a project, and I think the code is totally not contextual. But the project in itself can be very contextual, because it can be an answer to the context, but not in the sense that it copies the context and make the surroundings visible. But the architectural project can be an answer to the context in the sense that it is totally different than the context. For instance, we made a project in Voorburg, a very small city in Holland, where the context was parking lots, grey concrete, and the contextual answer was to bring in a lot of color and a lot of fluid forms in it. So it is very contextual, but in a total other way than you should expect normally. It was like a negative of the context. Yeah, when I talked about the code, which is something which comes outside of architecture, inside the project, but this can be very, how do you call it, decisive in what kind of materials and colors you use. So for instance, in the project of Voorburg, we used as a code a sewing pattern, which you can find in the magazines where you have to make your own trousers or shirts, you know. And this sewing pattern was the code for this project, but it also defines the forms, it defined the colors, and it defined also the materials. And in this case, we used glass mosaic tiles, which are made in Vicenza, in Italy. But this code was very important to have the decisions about colors and materials. So it is in the very beginning of the project where it's already clear what kind of details, what kind of materials, what kind of colors we use for the project. What we try to not to do is to make something very obvious, which you can understand immediately. So we always try to make something like, not really a myth, but something like a riddle or something ambiguous that you cannot really understand what it is. Again, we like to work in between the opposites. And that means that you can create a form which stay ambiguous, that you cannot understand it, you cannot analyze it, that you cannot rationalize it. The Fire Emperor was a study case. It is a kind of mix of a restaurant and a supermarket and an outside market. All the specifications of those three things were mingled together, and our dream was to create, with this building, to create a real public domain. And before you can create a public domain, you have to analyze the term, what is public domain? And the analysis of the public domain should be that there that it is a place where different groups can meet, really different groups, and that there is a communication possible between those groups. And we try to imagine something which could function like that. And now we try to mingle the restaurant, the supermarket and the outside market in one project, in one building, to create a public domain. We are working now on a lot of civil works, and with civil works I mean viaducts, tunnels, bridges, roads. But we are also working on our first outside of Holland project, which is in Prato. We are working on the extension of the PECCI museum. I don't know whether you heard, but I'm very proud that I'm able to hopefully work out this project in Prato. It is strange because the culture is totally different. Also the meetings are quite strange because I don't understand what is happening around me. But anyway, I try to be very cool and hopefully have control about the design process. But the question was to work out the project within 4 months, and we were successful to do it in such a short time. And our client, Elena PECCI, was very happy that we were successful to do it in such a short time. So we bring in our Dutch efficiency, if you can say that, into Italy.